In the previous video, in which I'm attempting to repair this MADAS IXe metallic mechanical printer, I got as far as doing some basic disassembly. As you can see, I've now removed the carriage. I've been having a look inside and inspecting it. It's fundamentally in quite good condition, but it's very tight, and that seems mostly due to the fact that all the oil and grease is dried up. It's absolutely filthy, as you can see. There's a big build-up of dirt under the carriage, and a lot of the pivots and slides are very tight. I also noticed that looking at the wear marks on some of these gears, that the fingers on the selectors were not actually engaged properly with the gears, so this probably wouldn't work properly as it was anyway. So what I've done so far is, as you can see, taken off the carriage, and that seems to be in quite good condition. It needs stripping down, and all the digits and digit wheels need a really good clean, so I'll do that next. In fact, what I'll do next is clean the main chassis. This all needs a really good clean and re-lubrication, so I'll do that next. Try and figure out what's going on over here. I think there's at least one part missing from this. I think this is the divide cancel button, but I don't think this is all working. There's nothing to stop this gear just falling off, so it looks like there is something missing. There's a post here with nothing on it. It might be for a different model, of course, but it does appear to have wear marks on it, so it looks like at some point something would have been on there. But once we get the whole thing running, we can start trying to figure out exactly what's going on with this. I have, of course, also taken off the selector plate, and I'll do the same with that, give it a good clean. It is possible to get these apart relatively easily, so I'll see if I need to do that. And as I say, give it all a really good clean. I'm not going to repaint this. It's in reasonably good condition, and I want to retain the age of the unit, so I don't want to make it look like a new one. I will need to make a replacement drive gear. So the drive gear that sits on the right angle drive down here that meshes with this gear is missing, and I will need to fabricate something there to get it to run again. We'll need to do something about sourcing a new belt or make a new one, and sort out what's going on with the motor drive. I'll go into that in a future video, but there's an issue with the motor itself, the governor and the on-off switch. There's a big lever down here that operates when you press the start-stop, and that's meant to start and stop the motor as well, but there's an issue with the motor itself that I think will prevent that from happening. So next thing is I'll take this over to the workshop. I'll start with this part and give it all a really good clean, and then get back on camera and we can start having a look at the mechanism and seeing what repairs are required. Okay, I've given the main chassis a really good clean. I did have to take a few more parts off to get to all of the nooks and crannies. Some of the parts do need freeing up. It's mostly in very good condition, and most of the parts are free and slide quite nicely, but some of these stops are stuck. That one's stuck, so is that one, and some are just tight, so they will need freeing up. It's just that sort of thing. It's just sort of normal wear and tear and the need for lubrication. I haven't re-lubricated this yet, I've just cleaned it, and as I say, it's come up extremely nicely. The gears and directional control all seem to slide quite freely. Quite often these stick on the shafts, and these seem to be nice and free, and they all spin quite freely. A couple were quite tight, but they freed up fairly quickly as soon as I'd finished cleaning, and they now all spin quite freely. The one that wasn't returning, I mentioned in the previous video that when reset one wasn't returning, and Curious Mark repaired one of the MADAS calculators, and they work on a very similar principle, and it was a similar fault with this. The gears can be put back in one of several orientations, and the one that wasn't zeroing properly was wrong. It was off by a half a digit or half a tooth in effect. And these gears, incidentally, are directional control gears that engage with the number wheels on the carriage. This is the carriage, and these gears engage with these. And depending on whether this lower bar is in the lower position where it is now, or the raised position, then either the lower part of the gear or the upper part of the gear will engage with one side or the other of the number wheel. And as the carriage moves, that will of course rotate the digit, and depending on which way this bar is, whether it's low or high, will determine which direction the digit rotates. In other words, if it's adding or subtracting, it can turn the digit either clockwise or anti-clockwise depending on the position of this plate. All the rest seems fine. It doesn't seem to have a huge amount of wear. Some of the parts, as I say, weren't in their proper locations, so I've got a feeling this has been a part before, and I still haven't yet had a look at what's going on over here. I need to figure out if anything's missing from this, and if so, what. And the next thing I'm going to do with this is, starting at one end, I'm going to go through, check that everything that's supposed to rotate rotates, everything that's supposed to slide slides. I'll then lubricate this, and I can start then cleaning up the rest of the parts and begin refitting them to this main chassis. But we will have a problem with the motor. There are some pieces missing. Luckily the motor start-stop contact is still intact, so this engages with a switch on the motor mechanism, so that when you press this start button down, this comes down and it energizes the motor and turns the motor on, and then the machine starts up. And at the end of the cycle, this lever pops back up, disengages this arm, and the motor stops. So it's all automated. So you push the button, the cycle starts, and at the end of the cycle the motor turns off. Again, underneath here you can see it's all nice and clean, and there was a lot of dirt on this. It was absolutely filthy, so once I'd cleaned it up, it wasn't too bad. I had to take this was locked up, I had to take this off, but it is now freed up. It just needs lubricating, and all the rest of it seems fine. We've got one lever here that I think we have an issue with, but I can look at that later. And other than that, the rest seems to be in excellent condition. So for a machine that's 100 years old, it is certainly faring well, and you can see it's very solidly built and extremely heavy, so hopefully it will be fairly easy to get it fully functional. Okay, so as I said, next thing I'll go through, get this lubricated, and then we'll get on to looking at the carriage assembly and see if we can get that dismantled and all the moving parts cleaned. Okay, so I've started to dismantle the carriage. I've taken off the reset bar and also the main support frame. So this is the back bearing support for the main number wheels. And what I can now do is remove all the number wheels and give them all a really good clean, lubricate them and make sure that there's no damage on them. Obviously I've taken the little thumb screws off the other side as well. I can't turn this over of course because these will all fall out. So I'll take these out one by one. And there's an extra one here. This one's for the bell ringer. So this is what causes the bell to ring at the end of the carriage. And what I can do once I've removed all these is do the same thing again with the other set of number wheels. There's another set of number wheels underneath this that go down to the end. So from here downwards there's another set of intermediate number wheels. So I can do the same thing. Once I've got these out, I can take this plate off, and then these will just lift out as well, and I can clean those at the same time. I can give the main plate, the carriage plate, a really good clean at that point, and start to clean each of the wheels and reassemble it. Give the guide a good clean. You can see that's absolutely filthy, and get it lubricated, and it will then be ready to go back onto the main chassis. I'll give you a look at this once it's been done, and you can see how they'll come up. The solid brass, so they'll clean up really nicely. It's just a bit of time and effort that's required, but it will come up extremely nicely. Same thing with the small thumb wheels. These are, well, they look very dirty. They're solid brass, so these will clean up really nicely. One thing I mentioned previously, I've mentioned it a few times, is that when you're restoring old equipment like this, it's well worth taking effort when you have to remove small screws, or with any screw. And what I found with these is these screws are extremely tight. They also have a very shallow, very narrow slot in them. And the same with these, and these are even worse because they're countersunk. And I didn't have a screwdriver that sat comfortably in them. Got a whole range of screwdrivers, but none would really start to kind of bite into them and turn them. They were all trying to ride out. I don't want to damage the heads on these screws, especially the screws that are obviously very custom style, custom size. So what I ended up doing was grinding a screwdriver specifically for this job. So it's got a very shallow taper on it now, and the end of it, I can't really show it on camera, it's a bit too small, but the end has got a slight dovetailing to it, so the very tip of the screwdriver is very slightly wider, and what it causes the screwdriver to do is kind of bite into the bottom of the slot, and it kind of pulls itself into the slot rather than trying to push itself out, and it makes undoing screws like this very much safer. It's much less likely I'm going to chew up the head. You can see they've all come out without any damage whatsoever, so well worth spending the extra time doing that. If you do shear one off, then obviously you've got to try and figure out what you're going to do to find a replacement, and of course you've then got the time, trouble and effort of removing the bit that's broken off. Okay, so anyway, next step, get this cleaned up, and we'll look at putting it back onto the main chassis. Thought I'd give you a quick look at the carriage before I started cleaning it up. You can see that once you've stripped it down, at least to this level, then it's much easier to clean. So I can now take this over to the workshop and start cleaning the various parts. All the wheels came out fairly easily. There's only one that needs repairing. I believe one of these has the pin broken off, so I'll have to find a solution for that. So it's this one, so I'll need to find a way to repair this. Other than that, I can't find anything wrong with it. It just needs cleaning up, lubricating, and then I can start reassembling. Okay, after a few hours work, I've got all the parts for the carriage cleaned. It's come up fairly well. If you were doing a full restoration, then at this point you'd just pop off the remaining components, just a few spring clips, and strip this and refinish it, but I'm not going to do that for this restoration. This is just really a repair and clean up to get it working, but it's still come up fairly well. It's still got most of its original paint, and the rest of the parts have come up extremely well. I spent some time cleaning up all the number wheels. They've mostly come up very well. Both the main number wheels and the intermediate number wheels have cleaned up extremely well and seem to be in good condition. The only broken part I found so far is the tip off one of the number wheels has snapped off. It's completely gone. The little brass wheel was actually held on with just a small piece of what looked like matchstick and araldite, so I'm not quite sure what's going on there. But it should be fairly easy to repair this, so luckily the little thumb wheels were still there, so no parts are actually missing as far as I can tell off the carriage. The rest of the parts have cleaned up fairly well. There's no real significant wear on these. It's just really now a case of lubricating them and refitting everything. You can see I haven't gone overboard with the cleaning. I don't tend not to polish things like this. If you've watched previous restoration videos, you'll know that what I've said in the past is I tend to like to retain the age of these old units, and although I clean them, tidy them up and get them working, I like to keep the originality as much as I can. I clean up things that need to be cleaned for the functionality, but when it comes to the mechanics and inner workings, I try to leave them alone. However, just by way of demonstration, I have polished up one of the pieces, so if you want to, you can clean them up like this and they will come up extremely clean, and you can polish them even more than this if you want to. But it tends to make them look a bit odd. It's an old machine. My opinion is it should look old. It's a personal preference. If you want to completely dismantle it, polish everything and make it look like a new machine, then that's of course something you can do. It's as I say, just a personal preference really. But the next thing I need to do with this is to get it reassembled, get all the parts refitted, and as I refit each one I'll lubricate the moving parts. I can't completely reassemble this until I've repaired the last number wheel, but I'll just go through the basic reassembly and we'll go as far as we can with the parts as they currently are. So we start with the intermediate number wheels. These have to go in first because they sit underneath everything else, and there is a hole that the bearing passes into, and that really needs to be lubricated. So as I fit each one, I'll give them a dab of oil. Okay, and then it pops into the hole, engaging the detent spring, and make sure it spins freely. Which it does, and then we do that with the rest of them. Okay, and now they're all in, the next thing I can do is fit the reset plate for the intermediate wheels. So this just sits in this slot. You probably can't see it on camera, but there's a machine recess, and this has a return spring. So the return spring just sits over the top, and then the entire plate sits in these slots. So I'm just going to put a bit of lubricant on the underside of this plate before I refit it. Okay, and then this just goes on here. I'll fit this spring first so I can fit it on the underside, and then this just fits in this location, making sure it engages with all the cams, which it does, and then the far end of the spring will fit over the post that supports it. And then the next thing we have to do is fit the screws that hold this in place. Get those tightened down. Okay, so make sure that they're all in the 0 location once we pull this lever across, which they are. And I can now attach the return spring. Make sure that sits all the way in. And this lever should now move all the way across freely, which it does, and I can now screw the thumb lever back on. This needs cleaning up, but I'll put it on for now just to stop the lever bending over. Okay, and as you can see, all the numbers are clearly visible. The lever moves nice and freely, and so we can move on to the next part of the assembly. Okay, so the next thing we have to do is fit all the number wheels, and same thing here. I'll just put a small amount of oil on each of these pivots before I put them in, and then they just fit through the holes in these locations, and again engage with the detents. So as I said, this one will need repairing. I'll pop it in for now just so you can see the entire carriage go together, but I will need to take this one back out and repair that. I'll show you the repair once it's done, but I'll just pop it into place for now. And then these two end wheels are for the bell ring. So they make the ding sound as the carriage gets to the end of its travel. Okay, so that's all these number wheels in place. The next thing we have to do is fit the support plate. So this is the bearing support plate. Normally I'd oil all of the pivot points, but because I need to take this wheel back out again for repair, I'll just pop it into place for now, and I won't put the screws in either, but I'll give you some idea as to how this entire thing fits together. Okay, so once that's refitted, it supports the back end of all the number wheels, and it also supports the back end of all the intermediate number wheels. Also carries this actuator bar. There's a series of levers on the underside, and that's actuated by this bar here. It can be set from this end when the 0 lever is moved across, and then it resets at the end of a mathematical function. So the final part to fit on here is the 0 actuator bar. So this is responsible for resetting all the number wheels to 0, and it sits on these pillar blocks and just slides back and forth whenever the thumb lever is pulled across, and that just engages with the lower gears on the number wheels. So it's just a matter of getting this to engage in the correct location. Okay, so that sits in that location, and then these top blocks sit on the pillar blocks, and they hold the bar in place but allow it to slide back and forth. Again, I won't fit these because I need to disassemble this so that I can repair the broken number wheel. And then the thumb wheel just screws in from the other side and engages with the 0 bar, and then when the bar's pulled across, it causes all the number wheels to be reset. There's of course a return spring, and that just sits on the far end of the 0 actuator bar in that location, and it just returns the bar to its home position when the thumb lever is released. So once the entire carriage is assembled, then it can of course be refitted to the machine, but I need to repair the broken number wheel before I do that. I'll just quickly flip it over so you can see how it looks, and you can see already there's a big difference, and the entire thing looks far better than it did before. Still needs a bit of cleaning, just get rid of this excess oil, but you can see now that all the numbers look much better, they're all readable, and the whole thing looks a lot better than it did, and hopefully it will function as it's supposed to. Certainly sliding a lot more freely, but once it's all been screwed together, we can give it a final test before we refit it to the machine. So that's it for this video. In the next video we'll get the carriage refitted to the main chassis, and then we'll start testing it and see if it works and repair any faults that we find.